Hi everyone, and welcome to this course, Robotic Process Automation, Getting Started. My name is Tommy van Schaik. I'm an IT project manager, agile implementation coach, and RPA enthusiast. Robotic Process Automation, or RPA, has seen a huge surge in usage in the last couple of months. A lot of organizations have realized that the people in those organizations are spending a lot of time executing non-value adding and repetitive tasks. Robotic Process Automation is the use of software robots to automate and improve those tasks and processes within organizations. In this course, we're going to get you familiar with all the concepts related to RPA and how it can improve your organization. And this course is set up as follows. First, we'll do a proper introduction of Robotic Process Automation. We'll look at the concepts and the benefits of RPA, but also the risks that are involved with an RPA deployment. Then we'll look at the best areas in which you can apply Robotic Process Automation. We will look at the life cycle of our software robots, from analyzing the process they are automating to the development and testing, to the maintenance of the robots. And finally, we'll look at how organizations typically implement robotic process automation within their organization to reap the benefits and make sure that we minimize the risks involved with such an implementation. Now, in this specific introduction module, there are a couple of concepts that we will explore. First, we will answer the question, why do we need RPA within our organizations? What benefit do we get if we implement software robots within our organization? Then we will zoom in on the concepts related to robotic process automation and things you should be aware of from a user perspective. We'll look at the history of RPA and why it's becoming so popular at this point in time. And finally, we will look at the pros and cons of robotic process automation and whether or not it is a good fit for your organization. Alright then, so let's get started on this module, Introduction to RPA. So the first question we will have to answer is, why do we need robotic process automation? And we'll try to look at this from a management but also an operational point of view. So let's try and demonstrate by means of a real-life example. One international airliner recently had to cancel a lot of their flights because of the COVID pandemic. Now, by law, they were obligated to refund all of the flights to their passengers. So the process they set up was simple. The passengers would just send an email to an employee. That employee would then check each individual system of the airline to check whether or not that passenger indeed booked a flight with the airline. If that was correct, then the airline would email their insurance company and, in the meantime, update their financial systems, contact the customer, and make sure that payment was received by the customer. All of this was done by individuals, and this was the plan for the airline. If one of the applications was bad, then the employee would go back to the customer and start to work out the issue until they came to an agreement. Now, the airline quickly set up this process because they were expecting a lot of refund requests to come their way. However, when they looked at the numbers, they realized it would be 120,000 applications within 2 weeks. On average, it took about 4 minutes to process one request, so that would leave us with 480,000 minutes in total just to handle these applications. That's about 8,000 hours of work, and that loosely translates into $400,000. Which is, besides the fact that they had to refund all of these flights, a huge cost driver for the organization. So then they came up with the idea to apply robotic process automation for this process. They looked at the process itself and realized that a lot of these tasks were actually very repetitive and could easily be handled by a software robot. So the robot would take on the refund requests that were received from the customer, automatically check the systems, check the financial systems, made contact with the insurance organization, and made sure that the refunds actually reached the customers. If the process was executed successfully, the customers would be notified digitally by the robot, and the process would be complete. Now, of course, this is the happy flow. There was also a possibility that applications were not filled out completely or there were issues with the application. In that case, the employee would be notified and they would actually do the double check with the system and, if needed, make contact with the customer to work things out on an individual level. This, of course, was a way more challenging job than actually handling these standard forms and repetitively checking all of these systems. So the employee happiness went up because they were allowed to only handle the exceptions, which made the work way more satisfying. Now, when we look at the numbers, it turned out that 80% of the tasks could be handled by a robot and the rest were exceptions. It took about $800,000 to implement, so for those of you who are quick at maths, that's $240,000 less cost for this individual transaction. So this is a good example of effective use of robotic process automation. All of the mundane tasks were automated by a robot, and the actual knowledge workers in the organization got to do more challenging jobs and actually provide more value for their time. It was also a huge cost saver and an overall success story for robotic process automation. Now, as you can see, the emphasis of RPA is in repetitive tasks and taking them away from knowledge workers. And this is exactly the problem that robotic process automation solves. In the next clip, let's take a closer look at all the different concepts involved with robotic process automation and how they all tie together. So after that success story, it's important that we clearly define robotic process automation and how it can help your organization. Now, RPA has been around for a while, but initially it didn't really take off, and that mostly had to do with the underlying technology not being mature enough. Now, over the years, the definition of robotic process automation has been blurred a bit. So in this clip, let's define robotic process automation. And in its very core, robotic process automation are software robots that are meant to optimize processes. So we're not talking real-life robots, just software robots. And that is the basic definition. But before we can explore robotic process automation, we have to look at the way that organizations usually set up their IT and how users interact with that. So usually we have the hardware layer, and on top of that we have applications with their own data stores. All of these applications are usually connected to APIs in modern organizations, and the knowledge workers in the organization use these tools for their daily work. Now, the idea of robotic process automation is that we take a robot to first learn what the knowledge worker is actually doing on these systems, and after a while take over the more mundane tasks of that knowledge worker so they can focus more on value-adding tasks. Now, this doesn't mean that the knowledge worker doesn't have access to the system any longer. However, they can spend more time, for instance, interacting with customers, coming up with creative ideas, or helping the automation in the organization. The whole value proposition of RPA is that we use bots to take over the boring and mundane tasks from knowledge workers and free up time so they can pursue more creative tasks. So basically, RPA is an added layer of robots on top of the application layer in the organization. And one of the things that it has going for it is that it has a low tech boundary. Most RPA systems are set up in such a way that even normal business users who don't necessarily have a technical background can automate some of their processes. The more advanced robots will obviously be created by people with technical knowledge that know how to program such a robot in detail. However, the modern tooling that is used allows business users to automate most of their processes on an individual level. So an organization can implement this technology without having to pay expensive programmers. They just need to teach the business users how to use these applications. So it has a low tech boundary which helps with implementation. Now, of course, process improvement systems have been around for a long time. However, those are quite different. If you're talking about business process management applications, those are basically new systems that still interact with the user and also connect to other applications in the organization through APIs. The issue with implementing these is that they do require tech people to implement them, and usually the people that have to work with these business process management applications have to undergo training, which makes the implementation more expensive. So you should not consider robotic process automation the same as a business process management application. Instead of being part of the infrastructure, RPA is put on top of the application layer. Another comparison that we usually find that is not correct is that RPA is the same as macros within applications. In theory, macros can do the same thing, except they are limited to one application. RPA sits on top of the application, so it can also do the interaction between applications. This is especially useful for processes that handle a lot of data between applications. So you could consider RPA non-invasive as it doesn't require new implementation, and it's cross-system, so it can help with multiple applications. And its core strength is to automate basic digital transactions. Later, when we discuss the concept of hyperautomation, you will learn how robotic process automation fits in with total solutions that can automate the processes in your organization end to end. But RPA is specifically aimed at automating basic digital transactions, like the refunding process we explained earlier in this module. Some other areas of application could be copying information between applications, create, read, update and design actions on databases, log into websites, make calculations and do basic logic, and read forms and documents, and then process the information found there. Now, it's important to realize that within RPA, we are talking about software robots who are not visible. It's not a physical robot that goes around and does things for you. It's a digital robot that sits on top of the application layer and helps you with basic transactions. We should also make the distinction between artificial intelligence and RPA. Although there are some AI elements within most robotic process automation applications, AI is usually a dedicated system that makes decisions, while RPA is aimed more at automating more basic processes that do not require artificial intelligence to make decisions. Again, once we start discussing hyperautomation, AI is definitely a factor that can be integrated with robotic process automation to also make decisions within your process flow, but we should make the distinction between RPA and artificial intelligence. Alright, so that in short was the definition and the boundaries of RPA. But what better way to show the effect of RPA than doing a demo? So let's take a look at that in the next clip.